Heed these words, you who wish to probe the depths of nature. How do you expect to find outside yourself that which you seek? Hidden within is the treasure of treasures. Know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe of the gods. Also, as Carl Jung echoed, those who look outside dream, those who look within awake. So what we're talking about in this video is awakening, and how we've really been denied the true intelligence, the true teachings of our ancients, which would actually give rise to a much heightened state of consciousness and an illuminated state of awareness that would see the secrets that the universe has otherwise kept from us and have indeed been occulted by our fellow humans and their overlords for thousands of years. And really, the title of this video may be something like, the secret teachings of the universe. But really, there's no teaching that needs to take place. All there needs to be is an instruction of returning our minds back to their natural state. So if you had not really engaged with many human beings in your life and you'd live a more hermetic lifestyle, if you were left to your own devices, if we were free enough to go out onto the beaches and into the deserts and on the jungles on our own, invariably this knowledge or these teachings would become second nature to you, because you would have experienced by that point a oneness with the nature and the world that's seemingly around you, but actually is yourself. And so this is all tied to the Hermetic principles, and the first of which is the principle of mentalism. So it seems as though when we're born, we're in here, right? And everything outside of us is not actually ourselves, because we can only animate our bodies, we can only walk around, and it's seeming like thought is seemingly occurring right here. So I'm thinking left arm up, right arm up, and I can animate this matter around me for sure. But what if the consciousness is not actually solely contained within the cranium, but what if it's actually an infinite, ubiquitous awareness through which the brain receives, and indeed that's what Kabbalah means, reception. And what we need to do is train the brain and train the soul to receive this consciousness in the most heightened way that's beneficial for us as a species on this planet. So what if consciousness is not locally created? What if it's actually just the universe and creation itself? Consciousness precedes the creation of brains, for example, right? It must do. Because if people like these scientists and modern way of looking at it is that consciousness is created in the brain, but if that's true, then where does the consciousness that created the brain come from? And we can look into all of these scientific experiments of Wilhelm Reich, for example, who was able to spontaneously create life from simply heating up iron filings, coal, and sand, just very inert materials in a totally sterile environment, and then cool them down rapidly, and you could see these tiny little microorganisms form with incredible structures and life. You could see that these things had mouths, they had eyes, and they seemingly came out of nowhere. But of course, when you realize the truth that they haven't come out of nowhere, they've come out of life itself, you begin to see that what we call life is just physiological life. It's just the stuff that we see, the animate, right? And we discard everything else as being dead. But actually, there's no such thing as death. There's no such thing as non-existence. Non-existence doesn't exist. And I guess the macrocosm of his scientific experiments is actually the scientific consensus of where biological life begins, which is on the ocean floor, right? And these hydrothermal shafts where hugely white hot temperatures are erupting in these volcanic activities around the tectonic plates of the ocean floor, and then they're immediately offset against these cool environments. So you've got this incredible cooling gradient of temperature, and this is exactly what Wilhelm Reich has created in his experiments. And so when you get that those two temperatures rubbing on each other, the mind, the universal mind, is able to imprint its blueprints onto matter. And we see this very basic biological form start to emerge. And from that moment, the light is contained within these organisms. And as they evolve and become more developed, eventually we become seemingly independent and seemingly autonomous. And ultimately on that path of the human experience, which is to go through involution and then to go through evolution. So these are the two forces that are working in reality, which are ultimately tied to what we call electromagnetism, the masculine and the feminine, the yin and the yang, the electron and the proton, the sun and the moon. All these principles are all embedded in the 7 Hermetic principles. And the first one, like we've said already, is the principle of mentalism. And so what this video is really about is about starting to get people to stimulate their innate mental faculties to the point where they can actually raise in awareness and not just sort of believe or disbelieve or perhaps agree or disagree with what I'm saying, but for them to actually directly experience it for themselves, which, you know, the truth that the universe is indeed mental and that consciousness is an incredibly expansive, infinite field of awareness and mindfulness. And we are receiving that in a very small degree through these 5 sensory apertures or organs through which we actually have our lives. And so the whole purpose of ancient wisdom and teaching was very different from what we think of as education today, which is all just solely left brain oriented education, which is simply focusing the mind, shutting the mind down into a tiny little field of consideration, whether that's architecture or something legal, or perhaps you are involved in sport or news, media, and whatever it is, attention is narrow perception, as Alan Watts said. So, you know, once we discard, or not just discard, but just balance out this Western model with a more Eastern model, which wisdom of which has actually been occulted from us here in the West, and we have the whole branch of esoteric literature. And any sort of brief inquiry into these things, you'll soon to find out this truth that you are the universe experiencing itself subjectively, and your body is one of those perspectives. Just one out of trillions, billions. So there is only one reality, but there are billions of ways of experiencing that. And as we climb up through awareness and through the chakras, and we can talk about the 7-fold nature of man, which is the microcosm of the macrocosm. So once you understand the microcosm, which is the human being, you begin to understand the sub-logos and the logos, and you begin to understand the dimensionality and the way that the universe is ultimately constructed. The infrastructure of the universe is akin to the infrastructure and architecture of the soul, which is 7-fold. And so we have been restricted down here through Western education with no stimulation real of the Ajna chakra, which means beyond wisdom. And we can attain those things simply by engaging more so in what would be called the feminine polarity of thought, which is more of the intuitive psychic capabilities. But it's also the closing of the eyes and the imagining. And this is where we come back to the original quotes and statements from this video, which is those who look within. It's those who look inside that awake, right? So it's the training of the third eye, which is the reason we can see our dreams. So when the brain shuts down and we are removed from the beta state of consciousness and into more of a theta and then gamma state, other parts of the brain are activated, and we're still having an experience, but we forget that. And then when we wake up in the morning, we write it off as being some sort of illusory chance happenings of random brain cells firing. But actually, it's you having an experience in a higher plane, a higher dimension, which we might call the astral planes. And so we can start to access these higher levels of consciousness simply by, and the analogy that we might use is that of a matchstick and a matchbox. Say the matchstick is representative of the Western education system, and we've all been sharpened like a blade. We've got these, these very quick intellect and this incredible capacity to build certain technologies and do certain things in the world. But what we're lacking is the texture on, say, the matchbox, which could be seen to be the imagination, the texture, the intuition and the creativity, which is definitely there in a more fragmented way through sort of creative disciplines like architecture, art, engineering, and so on and so forth. But remember, Ajna is beyond wisdom, so this is involving existential imagination, and your own being is placed in your contemplation of your place in the world. For example, why is it when we wake up we're not asking ourselves, Where are we? What are we? How can we even see the world around us? If I see green, is that really what's there? Another organism won't see green, right? And so on and so forth. Are there any nouns in this universe, or are they simply all processes in consciousness? It's all just shapes, forms, textures, and tones, right? And we are all of those things. It's like a phantasmagoria. It's an illusory nature, which is made permanent. And it's like Albert Einstein said, reality is an illusion, albeit a permanent one. And that's what the brain is doing. It's tricking. So nature has decided to separate itself from itself in illusion only, to experience itself anew. And this is what contrast gives rise to this meaning in our lives independently, but also on a more cosmic scale. And we can talk about that in other videos. But to continue with this analogy, you strike the match that has no texture. Say you strike the match on the wrong side of the matchbox, nothing happens, right? And so that's indeed what's happening, and why we're being capped here. We're not coming into Solomon's temple, the sun and the moon, right? Because we're only fixated on the left brain hemisphere. And we see what happens when you do start to engage in more contemplation, or if the left brain hemisphere goes offline. I don't know if you're familiar with the Jill Bolte-Taylor video where she's a neuroscientist. She had a tumor on the left brain hemisphere, which means that side of her brain went down. And then as soon as that was happening, she was having these experiences where she was ultimately disembodied and leaving her body, and she realized how expansive her being was. And she just felt like she's never going to be able to get back into this body. But of course, when the tumor subsides, she again is localized. So it's the brain that's only giving us this sense of localization, you see. When actually, if we switch it off, like we do in our dream state, we realize the truth that when we wake up, it's a dream. When you have a spiritual awakening, you wake up to the physical reality as a dream. So when you do start engaging in these more feminine activities of contemplation, meditation, philosophy, on your own, and directly engage in the question and not be concerned with the answer, you're starting now to strike that force, and the match is illuminated, and the flames of spirit are reignited in the soul, and the Kundalini is allowed to raise up through the body and pierce through into the Solomon's temple, into Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, Krishna spirit, etc. And this is why they show that in the Pharaoh's hat. They'd have these two snakes, the Ida and the Pingala nerves, symbolic of the idea that this man or woman has attained a higher level of consciousness and pierced base human consciousness, which is also known as ahamkara in Hinduism. So the point for these videos is to start to get people to contemplate and engage in their own existence, and to start philosophizing about their reality, and to then to realize that they are in fact the universe experiencing itself subjectively. And you begin to see the truth that all matter is energy condensed to a slow vibration. You are those things. There is no separation. It's just an illusion that you are this localized entity walking around this sort of seemingly sterilized Cartesian model of XYZ space, and we're just walking here and we're walking here. But physical reality is not something we exist in. Physical reality exists within us. It's a construct that's experienced apparently outside ourselves. And so we will begin to delve further into this topic in future videos, and I hope that you've extracted any kind of insight from this video. The whole reason I'm making these videos is to raise human consciousness so that we can ultimately eradicate poverty and alleviate inequality in the world, and to remove suffering, needless suffering that needn't exist anymore. As soon as we reach these heightened levels of consciousness and we balance out the anahata, the heart chakra, and we develop true care in the world, and we start to focus our attention on the betterment of our social conditions. And you can see exactly how we can do that at humanityconnect.com if you're interested in learning more. Anyway, that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks very much for watching.